All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Charlie Dill, Associate Director with the Office of Admissions. Really here is a resource to answer any admissions related questions you have both during today's session and beyond. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Andy to introduce himself to you all as well.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Andy Lopez-Lara, and I'm the admissions assistant here at the Harvard T. Chan School of Public Health.
Great. Thank you, Andy. And then last but not least, Kathy Austin, our Director of Financial Aid.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kathy Austin. I'm the Director of Financial Aid. Really glad to have you here and hope I can give you some good information about how we do financial aid at Harvard Chan. Great, so let's get started. I think the first thing that's on everybody's minds is what kind of programs do we have? And I know you've heard about that through admissions a little bit already. It is also important to understand which of our programs do have consideration for either grant and scholarship aid or for federal student financial aid. So let's start with just the Harvard Grant Scholarship Aid. Basically, our MPH programs, including the 45 credit and 65 credit program that are academic year residential programs, are eligible. So are the Master of Science programs, the 42.5, 60 credit and 80 credit programs, all of those being residential programs as well. The MPH in Epidemiology, which is an online on-campus program, is also eligible for scholarship aid. The new MPH Generalist online program is also has ability for you to have financial aid. And last but not least, although you do not apply through Harvard Chan for any of the PhD programs, it is important to know that they are fully funded. And you don't have to apply for financial aid unless you're interested as a domestic student for any type of loans, which is usually pretty rare. So those are all the programs that are eligible. And then just to spell out the programs that are not eligible for financial aid would be the Master in Healthcare Management, or MHCM. And then also our summer only MPH 45 credit program and the Master of Science 42.5 credit program. So moving over to our federal financial aid programs, basically almost all of them that I just talked about in the last statement are eligible. The only one that kind of jumps out of that category is the MPH in Epidemiology. So while you can get granted scholarship aid through Harvard for that particular program, it is not, unfortunately, eligible for federal aid, and it's because it is a less than half-time program. Okay, great. So let's move to the next page, our next slide. In terms of applying for financial aid, we try to keep it pretty simple. The key dates that I want to go over with you are in December and January. So basically, you're going to meet the admissions deadline for application, which I think you all know, or hopefully you've heard, is December 1. And then as soon as your application is in our admissions system and is complete or verified, either one of those statuses, then that information will go over to the financial aid system. And from our system, we will send you an email that will tell you that you can now access the Harvard Chan Grant Scholarship application. That email will also give you credentials so that you can access the portal that we use. And we should have that to you, as you see here, by early to mid-December at the latest. So if for some reason you have not received an email from our office by December 21st, please contact us, especially if you know that your your admissions application has been sent in. Then what you want to do is make sure you complete the grant scholarship application. So the grant scholarship application deadline is January 8th. The good news is that it's really a pretty simple application. So we are not asking for a ton of information. It really shouldn't take you too long to fill it out. And we also really want to make sure that you understand the importance of meeting the deadline of January 8th if you want any grant or scholarship. There are a lot of students that sometimes think that they don't need to apply until after they've been admitted, but this is not the case for us. So you will apply hopefully by January 8th, and that allows us to assess your financial aid application and give you your financial aid package at the time that you receive your admissions decision. So we want to be able to do that for you. And if you wait until after you've applied, after you have received your decision from admissions, then we wouldn't be able to make that happen for you. The other piece of the financial aid application that you may want to consider trying to complete, it is not a required document to be considered for financial aid, or I should say financial scholarships or grants from the school, but that document is the FAFSA. So that is the federal form in order to be considered for any type of federal aid. Specifically, that is federal loans and or federal work study. And so some of you may have completed this in the past, and just to let you know, right now the FAFSA is available. So if you want to get it out of the way, you don't have to worry about it later on. If you know you want to be considered for federal loans or work study, you can do it at any time. You do not have to wait until like early to mid-December as you would for our application information. Okay, next slide, please. So as you're looking at our school and considering other schools, obviously the cost of education is going to be something you're going to want to understand and figure out how you're going to finance. And so what we've done here is just give you an example. The actual charges and cost of attendance that you see here are for just the flagship program, which is our MPH 45. So you will see that basically the cost of attendance comprises your tuition, your fees, and then a number of other things that it takes to actually live while you're doing your program. The resources on the right-hand side are all good places that you should visit on our website. We have a budgeting tool that can help you really break down how the charges look. There's also information on financial wellness, especially understanding that students may have other loans or may be needing to take out loans and how that can affect you in the future. The housing website is a good one to look at because while some students do choose to live in Harvard housing, most of our students really do live off campus, and this is a great website for trying to find resources for that. And then you can see on the right, we have more information about how to contact our office in particular. So let's move to the next slide where we break it down just a little bit more. So you'll see here that basically besides tuition and health fees, these are the costs that we are putting into your budget for each of the different categories. So approximately rent is almost $1,600 per month. Our food budget is around $470 a month. Personal expenses about $418. And then transportation is $90 a month. And that's really based on a T-Pass. And the good news is that Harvard Chan, as a student, you will be able to have a T-Pass where Harvard is sharing the cost with you. So you're not paying the full amount. So this gives you a sense of basically what your monthly cost will be. And this is, again, above and beyond just your tuition and your fees. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So in the different programs, we really have sort of a variety of I guess the amounts and really the percentage of financial aid that we're able to give out. The different programs, unfortunately, we do not have enough aid to be able to fund everyone, excuse me. We have limited funding, and so, excuse me. So we want to give you a sense of what you can expect. In the 45, in the MPH 45 and MPH 65 program, approximately 30% of students receive support. We have presidential scholars, program students that receive full tuition. So that's approximately 10 students per year in the MPH programs. But then there are also quarter tuition awards and half tuition awards. And so those are the majority of the types of funding that we have for our students in those programs. In the MPH Generalist, which is the new online program that we have very little data because we just have one cohort that has started this fall, but we were able to, at least for this fall, give about 50% of the student support from the school, and they were usually quarter tuition awards. The MPH EBI program is somewhat similar in these percentages, in that students in that program received, or I should say 50% of students, just like the MPH Generalists, receive support. The ranges are a little bit different. Sometimes they're as high as quarter tuition, but they can also be somewhat lower as well, as you can see from the range. In the Master of Science program, so any of the 3 different programs we have, about 40% of students receive support. And again, these are quarter and half tuition awards, but we do also have presidential scholarships of full tuition that can go to some of these students. And last but not least, if you are applying to the Doctor of Public Health program, we are able to give out need-based tuition awards. So for any student that shows financial need, they will be awarded a 50% tuition scholarship for the first 2 years of the program. And it's a potentially 4-year program. And so the 2 years are the highest in amount. So that 50% goes a long way. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. So we talked about Harvard Chan grants and scholarships. We've also talked about federal aid. We want to make you aware that there are other scholarships that you can look into. So university-wide scholarships. So these are scholarships that can apply perhaps to not just Harvard Chan students. That's why they're called university-wide. The Zuckerman Fellowship is specifically for domestic students that are either in or have, so they're either concurrently doing a program in law or business, or they're going to medical school. So they could be in a joint program, they could be taking a leave of absence from these programs, or they actually already possess these degrees, but then are also coming to get a Master of Public Health. And that program, you can find out more information on our website as well. The Commonwealth Fund is a specific program for physicians that are interested in minority health policy. And this is run through the Harvard Medical School, but our students are also eligible for this program. And then you also see here the FLAS Fellowship. This is actually a federal program, but it is run through the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. And it is for students that want to study a foreign language that helps relate to the MPH degree that they are receiving. On the other side here, on the right side, we have some information about external funding. So we really want to make it clear that it's important to look for other sources of funding and to start now. I cannot stress that enough. A lot of times the deadlines for these types of scholarships are much earlier and kind of coincide with more like what you see for the admissions deadline of December 8th, but they could be even earlier than that, like coming up in November. So what we want to make sure is that if you are eligible for some of these scholarships, that you go ahead and apply and look now. On our website, we have an external funding database where we have placed scholarships that we know about. And these scholarships that you'll see here have been awarded to at least one student at our school at some point in time. So we know that our students have been able to receive them. So that's a really good resource for you to consider at this point. There's another resource on there that's specific to funding that's specific to the sciences, and that's the Community of Science Pivot Tool as well. So, like I said, start early, and even if you find scholarships that perhaps, maybe even a deadline has already been missed for this year, if you're planning on being in a multiple year program, it would be a great idea to start sort of a tickler list of ones that you could apply for the second year of your program, or even subsequent after that. And as you see at the bottom, most likely, if you're in some of these online or summer programs, or MHCM, the MPH EPI program, or even just as a part-time student, it's fairly unlikely, especially I know for the university-wide scholarships, those programs aren't eligible for them. But for external funding, that often is the case as well. So just consider that when you're thinking about looking at these different resources. Okay, next, please. So we talked a little bit about federal student aid and how you would apply through the FAFSA form. Just to talk about this a little bit more. So as a graduate student, you are eligible for federal loans. The majority of our students are able to qualify for up to a $30,000 academic year limit. And right now the interest rate, it actually says 4.3% there. My mistake that I did not update that. It's gone up a point. So we're now at 5.3. So apologies for not having that corrected. Also, another loan that is possible as a domestic student for that comes from the federal government is what they call the Graduate Plus loan. So this is sort of if you were a domestic student who received any kind of loans, and or perhaps your parents took out what they call a Parent Plus loan. This is sort of the comparable version for a graduate student who is now considered independent from their parents. The Graduate Plus loan is another type of loan. And again, I apologize, it did not update the interest rate. It is another point above as well on the Grad Plus, so it's 6.3%. We do have the right percentages on our website, and I apologize for the mishap on the presentation. The good news about the Grad Plus loan is that if you do need additional loans to really make up the financing for the cost of education, you can take out up to that amount. So it's possible, and in some cases, students do use loans to finance, more than just their tuition and fees, sometimes their living expenses as well. There are lots of plans for paying back your loans, and there was really good news this week. I should have put it on the slide, but in the last week, for anybody who is actually in public service already, the public loan service forgiveness has now had some really good changes in the rules. There's an announcement on our website if you're interested in looking at that, but it is a temporary change. So we are hoping that it affects our students in a good way. And if you're already working or have made payments while you are working in the public sector, this may be good news for you. As far as work study is concerned, we have many students that qualify for federal work study. It is a need-based program, however. So unlike federal loans, where you actually do not have to have any financial need to receive the $33,000 unsubsidized loan I talked about, you do need to have financial need to qualify for work study. Work study is usually given out in $5,000 increments, or I should say annual allotments to our students who qualify. We can help you or actually guide you to our student employment website so that you have the information on how to track down jobs. As you can imagine, it's been an interesting time during COVID for students to work remotely, but we have even managed to have that happen as well. So we will continue to see what the future brings and whether or not remote work is still possible or whether most of it will be in person. Also good to know that if you do not find a job on campus, we do have opportunities for students to work off campus, or you can find an opportunity. And that usually means that you're working sort of something directly related to your studies and pretty much at a nonprofit. But we do have students, like I said, that work off campus. Just in terms of the hours that students work, we don't really have to limit you per any rules when you're in graduate school, but we do recommend that 20 is probably a good limit. And a lot of the academic departments or advisors will also say to students that, really in the first semester, or at least in the first month, that you maybe just see how rigorous the academic load is for you before you take on a position. And for some students, that's a really good strategy. Others do go ahead and get a job right away. I think you have to know what makes sense for you. But there are plenty of students who do use work to help their to help pay for resources like books and living expenses and so forth. Okay, next slide. Actually, the next slide is the last slide. So just want to point out that what the information that I presented to you today, I really try to keep it fairly short and sweet. We want you to know, basically how to look at our website to understand that everything I've said today is coming from our website. Hopefully, how to apply, what programs you're eligible to receive any type of grant or scholarship or federal loans. And also to really think about, what to expect with cost, what to expect with how to budget, and also understanding that we do have limited financial aid, and looking for external resources is going to be very, very important. Again, I want to stress the deadlines here. January 8th is really your key to getting our application done. And again, as long as you at least do our Harvard grant scholarship application, that will put you in the running for any of the scholarships I've talked about, except for the external resources and except for those university-wide scholarships that do require an additional application. I think that you'll find that it is really not a difficult process, but we're here to help at any point. Please reach out to us. As you can see, the contact information on the left. And we also have the ability to have you sign up for appointments with us. And we can do that remotely, as we've been doing for over the last year. So I'm happy to take questions, and I can open it up at this point.
Great. Thank you so much, Kathy. Yes, so we have a couple of questions that have come in along the way, but for folks that have anything that's on their mind and would like to ask, feel free to type that in the questions and answer box, and Andy and I will ask the questions to Kathy. So I'll dive in with the very first question that's come in, and someone wants to know, how is the award percentage decided for the MPH 45 and 65 credit programs?
So it's not so much that the percentage is decided, it's just that we work with the departments who make the choices of who is going to get financial aid. And so those percentages that you're seeing are based on the trends that we have seen over time in the last few years. So it's not like it's not that we decided 30% of students will get this amount of aid or 40%. But I will say that the fact that the percentages may not seem as high as some people, as even I would like to see, is just really explains that we have a limited budget for financial aid. And yet at the same time, we can also tell you that we have had increases in financial aid over the last 5 to 10 years that have really made these percentages go up.
Hey, Kathy. Somebody would like to know, are PhD applicants only admitted if they can be fully funded? If so, for how many years is funding available?
Sorry, could you just clarify? Did you say a PhD student?
That's correct. Sounds like a number of folks have questions on PhD as well.
Yeah, so if I understand the question, if you're admitted, you will receive full funding, but it has nothing to do with applying for financial aid. So you do not need to apply for financial aid. As a matter of fact, just to be crystal clear, all of our programs are need blind. So what that means is that we are not looking at any kind of financial need when determining whether or not you are going to be admitted. So the good news though is if you are admitted as a PhD student, the terms of your program are that you will be fully funded for the length of your program, and for our PhD programs, it depends on the program you're in, but it's usually a 4-year program or a 5-year program. Some students go beyond that, but it's usually it's like I said, it would be the 4 years for some programs or 5 years that you would receive all of your tuition, health fees, and receive a stipend for the living expenses as well.
Great, thank you, Kathy. Another person would like to know, are students who are pursuing an MD but will not have completed it by matriculation to the Chan School be eligible for the Commonwealth Fund?
So I am not exactly sure, I have to say. So I don't want to give you misinformation. I would be happy to try to find out that information. I don't know what would be the best way to communicate it out. Charlie, do you have a sense of that? Because I'm actually not sure if they are clearly already MD students or if they perhaps had taken a leave.
Yeah, we can, if we find out the answer today, maybe Andy and I could take a peek. We could pop some information into the chat for the group. And if not, we could send out a follow-up note to the attendees from today, and that's just fine.
Sure. The other thing is, and I could look right now, but I want to keep my mind on the questions I have, is that information may be present on the Commonwealth Fund's website through HMS. So that's what I'm going to look at first. And if I don't find the information there, I'm going to reach out to one of my colleagues.
And maybe I'll jump in real quick before our next question and just bigger context. So Kathy, I know there's these different opportunities, Commonwealth, Zuckerman, and these different opportunities. What's the relationship with these types of funding sources in the Chan School? Do they sit at the school, or are they more broad? Because it sounds like some of them are maybe housed in other schools at Harvard.
Yeah, I think I mentioned that the Commonwealth Fund was housed at the medical school. But if I didn't, yes, that is true. So it is not housed at Harvard, but our students are eligible for it. So this does happen at Harvard. It probably happens at other universities as well, where there is one school that is sort of coordinates or is the sponsor, so to speak, of a particular scholarship. But it may not be that just that school students are the only ones eligible, and that's the case here. In the case of the Zuckerman program, it is actually, it's a little slightly confusing, but let me see. So basically the Harvard Kennedy School, which is our school of government, is where the Zuckerman Fellowship actually is housed, and where sort of, if you understand like what a true fellowship is, which is where you not only have funding that helps to pay for your program, but you also have co-curricular activities, which is the case for the Zuckerman. So it's those co-curricular activities that are really happening in and around the Kennedy School. The application process itself, though, happens through our coordinating committee called the Committee on Harvard Scholarships. So when you go to apply, that's actually happening there. But when it comes to making the decisions about who is actually accepted, it still resides at the school's discretion. And so students who are applying to the Zuckerman program and are getting an MPH or planning to get an MPHR program still are first being decided or considered for admissions at HSPH. And then, of course, the Zuckerman committee, once they're aware that the student is in the running, will interview the student and then make a decision on whether the fellowship will be applied.
Someone would like to know if you are applying for the Population Health Sciences PhD program, would you also apply to those external scholarships concurrently with the PhD program?
So the PHS program is a PhD program. So we always think it's a great idea for you to apply for external funding. Sometimes it's, even if you don't necessarily need the funding, in the case of a PhD, you will be fully funded regardless. However, sometimes there is, prestige in receiving an external scholarship, depending on what it is, or maybe it's a particular, it's housed through a particular place that the student has an interest in. So that can be a good reason. So yes, I can say there is a difference though in a PhD applying for outside scholarships, that it's different than someone who's not going to be necessarily fully funded. And so therein lies the difference. So you don't need to apply, you will be funded. If there's a good reason to apply for something and you want to do that, I would encourage you.
Great, thank you, Kathy. Another question comes in, and I think we've answered the first part regarding the timeline for applying for the Harvard Chan financial aid application, but someone wants to know the content of what's in that application. For example, is there an essay component that they have to write when filling that out?
Sure. No, there is no essay. So basically we're asking some bio demo information and also just a little bit of, what your plan is in terms of what program you're applying to, what your status will be. But the majority, well, there's two other sort of major categories. One is financial information. So we'll be asking about your income in the past year, assets, and so forth. And then the second core piece is there's a number of questions that we ask that help us to decide whether or not someone might qualify for specific scholarships at Harvard Chan. So these help us basically to designate scholarships where the terms are very restrictive. And so we ask those kinds of questions. But other than that, it's pretty simple. I think it's an online application, but if you were to print it out, I would say it's probably no more than 2 to 3 pages long.
Hey, Kathy, somebody would like to know the deadline for applying for scholarships and loans.
So the deadline is January 8th to apply for any Harvard grants and scholarships. And it's really important to meet that. The deadline for loans is not January 8th in terms of in other words, if you miss January 8th, you potentially have missed your opportunity to get scholarships and loans, but scholarships and grants. But loans you can apply for, or work study you can apply for at any time from that point on all the way through your program. So federal aid is always available to a domestic student throughout their program up until really almost the end. In other words, you could be 2 weeks from graduating, and if you really decided that you needed a loan at that point, we would be able to process a loan for you.
Thank you, Kathy. Another person has a question based on something you said earlier, and they're saying to clarify, when you say that students can work off campus, does that mean work study can be used off campus?
Yes, that's exactly what I meant. I mean, really, it could be either. So you could be working and not have work study, and you just have another job that you've been able to find or are already working in. Or potentially, if you have work study, you could use it on and off campus job. And the thing I didn't point out before, and if you don't know this, the thing that is great about work study that is, so it's a great resource for students, but the other piece of it that makes it really a great benefit is to the employer. Because what happens is that if you're working on campus, the employer or your supervisor's department, whatever, is only paying 30% of your wage, whereas the federal government is picking up 70% of your wage. So with resources, all over the place being tight for some places, and certainly in this last year with, a somewhat difficult economy, this can really help an employer to find people to work for them at a much reduced rate for what they have to pay out.
Hey, Kathy, a combat veteran has a question regarding the GI Bill. They are asking whether if they were to choose to use their GI Bill to study and matriculate into the MPH 65 credit program, would Harvard still consider providing scholarships based on leadership and merit, like the GRE or GPA score? Is a THN school, do they participate in the Yellow Ribbon program as well, aside from the regular GI Bill?
So let me answer the last question first, because it's easy. Yes, we do participate in Yellow Ribbon, and our match rate is $10,000. And so if you qualify for Yellow Ribbon, then we would absolutely give it to you. And as far as other resources, so we work very closely with the MPH program. In this particular situation, you said you're applying for an MPH 65. So we would be working with the program, and they would determine whether or not they would be able to give additional aid. It really depends on the program. It depends on your relative need and merit relative to the other students that are looking for aid. So there's no reason why you wouldn't necessarily not be considered. In other words, you're definitely able to be considered. And so it would really be up to the MPH program as they pretty much make the decisions for those scholarships.
Thank you, Kathy. Another person's curious, how might financial aid and cost of attendance change for part-time students?
Sure. So basically the way it works for part-time students is that you're either paying the full-time rate or you're paying the part-time rate. So that means that if you take 15 credits or above, you're considered a full-time student. And so your tuition rate, which you would see on our website, would be at the full-time rate. If you decided that, let's say you're in an MPH 45 program, and for whatever reason you decide that you can't be full-time in the first semester and you would be part-time, your charge would be 50% less. So we just use a clear-cut half amount to determine what part-time students get charged as opposed to full-time students. The rest of the budget stays the same because you still need to have health fees, you still need to have resources for living, and so all of that stays the same. So it's really the tuition rate that is the changing factor there.
Someone is asking, what goes into the admissions decision to award a presidential scholarship?
So it's not an admissions decision. It actually is a decision that the departments will make. So I talked about sort of the numbers of presidential scholarships that we have the ability to award. And so it's really up to the individual program. So I think the numbers I showed you were that there were about 10 available across the MPH programs in the 45 and 65 residential programs. So the MPH program will actually make those decisions and let the financial aid office know. You can see more information on our website, but basically the Presidential Scholars Program is for students that are planning to go into public service. And, you know, we're lucky to have this program because the funding really does come from the president's office. And so we've had it for a number of years, but in terms of how it's given out, it's really through the program. And I should also mention that the same is true for about 7 or 8 that we have available in the Master of Science program. So those are the those would be the 42.5, 60 credit and 80 credit programs that we talked about earlier.
Great, thank you, Kathy. The next question I think is kind of a little bit more admissions related, so I'll ask it and then I'll jump in and take it as well. So a person wants to know if the application for the scholarship is separate from the course application, and they're specifically wondering about the MPH program. And yes, so if you're applying to the degree program, you would apply through our SOFIS application, which is the common application for many schools and programs of public health. And the application deadline for our MPH program is December 1st. As an applicant, you'll get many email messages from us about a variety of topics, but some of those topics will include financial aid. We work very closely with our colleagues in the Office of Financial Aid, and we will communicate pertinent deadlines, things that are coming up. So you'll not miss the opportunity to sign up. So we'll be in communication with you there. And then the financial aid application is separate. So that's not through the SOFIS application.
Someone would like to know what is the highest possible funding available for the DRPH?
So generally, as a rule and as a guarantee, we are giving out 50% tuition-based scholarships. So that really is the highest, 50% tuition for the first 2 years if you have need. So if you don't have financial need, then those scholarships aren't available. I don't know of too many other students that received other Harvard scholarships in addition to that, but there are students who have received external funding that have made it so that they have complete tuition and fees and living expenses paid for. But as I said, that's from external funding sources.
Great, thank you, Kathy. Another person would like more details. So after they apply for admission, and then they apply for scholarships through the financial aid office, when will they specifically hear back on whether they were selected for a scholarship?
So as long as you've completed our form, then we will let you know at the exact time that you receive your admissions decision. So right now we have, depending on your program, we are slated to start sending out awards. Depending on the program, they start going out in January, but the bulk of the program decisions go out in February. And so whenever admissions is sending out your particular decision and you've been admitted, that is the time when you will also find out from us whether or not you have received scholarships.
And I'll jump in real quick just on how we communicate different things with applicants. So as an applicant to the school, after you apply through SOFIS, eventually you'll get an email from the admissions office with information about setting up a account on a website called my.harvard. And that's essentially the portal in which you'll see your admissions decision. And eventually that's where you'll read your preliminary financial aid notification, just like Kathy was saying. So we communicate kind of via email for important moments of the process to go check your portal, but then all of those communications will be housed there. So it's kind of an organized place for folks to view those important communications as well.
Hi again. Someone's asking, for applicants waiting to receive green card in the next 12 months, would they be eligible for any scholarships or grants mentioned today? Or are they classified as international students for funding opportunities in the application round for fall 2022?
So, so if you've not received your green card yet, unless you have another type of qualifying status, so I didn't necessarily get into this, but for some students, they can have asylum status or refugee status. You could still be eligible for federal aid. I guess I just want to talk about federal aid for a minute. But in all of these cases, so let me be crystal clear, whether you are a true domestic student or and I mean that in the sense of, you know, you're a US citizen or you have a green card. But even if you are a DACA student or you are an undocumented student or you're an international student, so basically any of these particular categories, as long as you complete our Harvard Chan grant scholarship application, you will be considered for financial aid and for grants and scholarships specifically.
Thanks, Kathy. Another question regarding external funding. Given the name or the nature of the name, that funding is external and they can be on any sort of different deadline or organization. Do you have any recommendations about when a person should start looking for different opportunities as far as timeline goes?
I would start right now. So there's no time like the present. You know, we try to keep our links updated, although as we are speaking right now, we're trying to make sure that that's all correct. But I would start looking at our external database, or if you are able to find external funding resources on your own, but don't wait. I actually think that right now is the right time to start looking. And some of these deadlines for these external scholarships come up sooner than even the admissions deadline, let alone our financial aid deadline. So the time is now.
Hey, Kathy, what's a common mistake that you've seen in the past students make regarding financial aid?
I don't, so I'm not exactly sure what the question is referencing. I did I make a mistake on my financial aid application? I don't really think there's anything that would be what we consider a mistake on your application. There's no essay, there's no, you know, you're really just providing data to us that helps us understand what your financial situation is. And then also, you know, on the federal aid application, you just have to fill out the application as requested. And it's even less, it's harder to make a mistake on the federal application than ever before, because if you have ever done it in the past before the last like maybe 3 or 4 years, you would have had to use your own tax return if you had one, and then take the information from your tax return and complete the FAFSA form with that information. And now there's actually the ability to check a box. And so basically the FAFSA processor, the federal processor, has access to your tax return. And so there's no need to kind of like figure out, well, what line from my tax return has to go to what line on the FAFSA. So that is a nice change that happened a few years ago that's true. And then But I will say that I have seen a couple of times on our grant scholarship application where someone has mistakenly put in too many zeros and called our office or, emailed our office to say, I think I made a mistake and it was just inadvertent. But I really, if the question is more about, did I make a mistake and that made me ineligible? I think that what you need to understand is that I don't think that we've really had mistakes like that. And frankly, if students end up not receiving aid, it's usually because you don't have a lot of need, or you might have need and we just don't have enough funding to be able to spread it as far as the needy students that we have.
Great, thank you, Kathy. So people's financial situations can obviously change throughout time. So when someone hears back regarding a scholarship, is that a final decision, or are there opportunities for them to contact OFA to talk about kind of need that's presented itself since they initially applied?
So I think we're always willing to hear if something drastic has happened, and we do have students that will appeal for changes of circumstances. So we don't want to ever shut down that. I will also say that sometimes, even if there has been a change, we may or may not be able to offer any more funding. Usually what happens is that we offer all of our funding upfront. And then when we have allocated it out, then we don't have more to give. The situations where someone tells us about a change in circumstances, sometimes there might be a possibility of a little bit more, but that it's pretty rare, I have to say. But again, it could result in the fact that maybe there's more loan eligibility, or if perhaps one of the sources is coming from a different place, then that might be a possibility. So it's not that we certainly want you to let us know if you had a huge change in circumstances. And of course, this last year with COVID, we heard that from many students. And in some cases, there was a little bit we could do to help. In other cases, it may not have been possible. But like I said, it's always worth emailing us and letting us know what your situation is and how it has changed.
What is the biggest difference between undergrad and graduate school financial aid?
Well, from a federal standpoint, there aren't any grants through the federal aid system. So when you're an undergraduate, there is a possibility of receiving a Pell Grant, or what they call a Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, otherwise known as SEOG. So those particular federal grant programs are only for undergraduates and do not exist in the graduate world. On a bigger scale, it's really hard for me to answer that question because it depends on the school. If you went to, so it's really quite hard. So it really just depends. Maybe you went to a school where you had lots of grants and scholarships and you didn't have many loans, and so now coming to graduate school, you're faced with a different situation where perhaps you may have some grants available to you, but not nearly as much as what you had in undergrad. Or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe you didn't really qualify for need-based aid, but maybe now, because we look at need and merit, from a merit standpoint, maybe you'll qualify for aid. So I'm sorry, that's sort of a all over the place answer, but I think it could range completely all over the board.
Great, thank you, Kathy. Another question has come in and it says, can you talk about the Tatelman Award? I'm not familiar with that one myself.
Yeah, so the Titleman Award is an award through the Committee on General Scholarship. So when you apply, just to make this really clear, when you apply for financial aid through Harvard, I said this before, but our application lists a number of questions, some of which are for restricted scholarships through our school, and some are through this Harvard-wide Committee on General Scholarships. However, it is not a separate application. The only sort of, I guess, exception to that is that the Titleman does require an essay, which is why you'll see that on the application asking for an essay. And so if you are interested in applying for that, you do have to write an essay. And that particular scholarship is for, I think, students that have experienced pretty difficult circumstances in their life, and talking about those circumstances. The other thing to keep in mind for the Titleman, and really this is true for all the CGS awards, is that we nominate students to the CGS. The possibility of you receiving a CGS award. So we could have a number of Titleman essays, and in the end, we're only allowed to submit one. And all the other schools at Harvard that are also competing or have students competing for this award are only allowed to submit one. So the process is through our school, even though it goes to this wider Harvard committee. And so we are reading every single essay to see which one we think is going to be the most competitive one to win the award.
Great, thank you, Kathy. So acknowledging that we have just about 1 minute left, I'm going to close today's session and give a very big thank you to everyone who came today to ask questions. I do apologize we weren't able to get to everyone's questions today, but really appreciate your engagement and your questions for Kathy Austin, our Director of Financial Aid.